And we're live.
Good morning, everyone. It's the one, the only Senor Silverback himself. We have El Cuco working on the airwaves, CJ, the master of the flux capacitor, and we have none other than our very own Maven from London joining us today, London Paul. So it's going to be a special morning show. You're going to get the triple effect of CJ, myself, and London Paul. So it's going to be exciting. So fasten your seatbelts, get your notebooks ready. And I hear that echo of myself somewhere in the background. So someone, I think there's a CJ. I think you might need to mute something. I'm hearing myself.
There you go. I think, Paul, you have the live stream up.
Yeah, I think it might have been me. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, you just hit the mute button on it. You can.
I've done that.
Chat room. Okay, cool.
No,
Okay,
it was actually on my laptop. So yeah, I plead guilty. It was all my fault.
No worries.
So, again, you can follow us on roguemoney.net. You can check London Paul out on theseriousreport.com. And again, folks, the beautiful thing about the Serious Report is you can go there for less than the price of a zombie frappuccino. That's a limited edition drink at Starbucks. For less than a price of a venti zombie frappuccino at Starbucks, you can be a subscriber and a member to the Serious Report and get Paul's daily briefings on what's going on in the entire world. His synopsis is very key. With that being said, also, guys, you can check us out on you can follow us on Twitter at the Rogue Money and at the Serious Report as well. And with that being said, also you can check out our sponsors, RemainCalm.us. Frank and Mr. X were on yesterday. It was a killer show. If you hadn't got a chance to listen to it, go back and listen to that. It's about buying a car without credit and how to deal with certain financial issues. That financial hardships that many people are facing in this country. My God, tens of millions of people are facing in this country. So check them out, RemainCalm.net. You can get your gold USB to surf the web anonymously. You can also get, their funding. You can get their. These guys do so much. Their credit cleaning, their asset protection, the smart banking options. So many things these guys do. These are real services. They're not trying to sell you a stupid hokey pill in the hope that you can get a larger genitalia or your hair grows back. Okay, this is not what they're selling you. They're selling you actual solutions that actually work. With that all out of the way, gentlemen, good morning to you both. How are you all?
Well, good morning to everyone.
Good morning, Paul.
Yeah, good morning, CJ.
Good morning, guys. So many things are happening. The left keeps eating themselves. We had some JFK documents released. There is a debate right now whether Bix Weir owes me a Litecoin or I have to pay Bix Weir a Litecoin. We don't know as of yet, but we know 2,800 have been released. But there's a key 200 that is being held back. That is basically hiding who the major players are. That's slated to release on April the 26th. So whatever you guys want to do, wherever you guys want to get into, I guess, Paul, I'll start with you. Then CJ, you can chime in, man.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think it's a bit of a kind of score draw between yourself and Bix, but the reality is, predominantly the majority of these documents are being released and people are poring over them, and there's probably not a lot of that interesting stuff in it. It's the 200 that weren't that may or may not have something interesting. Now, Trump came out and said, it's great, and the American people need to have the, access to the information, but and he says, I'm ordering the veil to be lifted. But then he says at the same time, executive departments and agencies, well, basically that means the CIA in the process, have said, hang on a minute, there's certain information that we don't want released. And we feel that there's components of documents that need to be redacted. Now, they're saying it's to do with national security, law enforcement, and foreign affairs concerns. Now, based on it happened in 1963, it's got nothing to do with the date. I think it's more to do with if these 200 documents came out unredacted, it might cause national security issues in the US because people are going to say, what the hell is in these documents and what's the reality of what actually went on that day? Because I don't think there's any fear of contradiction. There is no way Lee Harvey Oswald killed JFK. That's just absolute nonsense. So there's a lot of law enforcement might be a problem because how are the American people going to react to such an outburst of reality effectively to the average person who doesn't know anything? In terms of foreign affairs, that might just be a smokescreen. But of course, undoubtedly at some point the Russians are going to get blamed for it. Because, and I remember seeing a documentary back in the 80s where even then they were trying to say that he was a KGB agent. I remember seeing this documentary where they claimed that someone decided to unearth Lee Harvey Oswald's body and it wasn't in the coffin anymore. I mean, it's just, and all this weird conspiracy about the Russian involvement. Now, the issue, of course, is that he said, you know, he's got no choice, this is Trump, but to accept these redactions rather than, you know, allow what he termed irreversible harm to the nation's security. Well, possibly that's true, possibly isn't. My issue is they've given them another 180 days, basically allowing them to kick the can down the road. And the question is, in 180 days, what excuse are they going to have then? Because there is no doubt amongst the 3,000 documents, there is going to be some pretty juicy stuff that is going to surprise and shock a lot of people, not people who listen to this show or elsewhere, but certainly the average American, average British person and European and world person who's going to go, hang on, what the hell's this all about? So I think tellingly it's what is in those documents that clearly the CIA, the NSA and whoever else just doesn't want to be released. And of course, yeah, potentially it could cause national security and law enforcement issues. In terms of foreign affairs, I think that's largely a bit of a smokescreen, but certainly depending on what damning information came out, it could certainly impact national security and law enforcement. And it's something that, you know, people kept saying to me, why aren't you discussing this whole issue to do with JFK? I said, well, it's a non-story. It's a non-event for me. There was no way we're going to have all these startling revelations coming out yesterday about what happened. There was undoubtedly the kind of meaty stuff was going to be redacted, and they've kicked the can down the road accordingly. But for me, it's just at the moment it's become a non-event, and yeah, undoubtedly there'll be a lot of information coming out about what's said in the 2,800 documents, but largely it's going to be a non-event and a non-issue, at least from my perspective, anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so as well, man. I think the deep state has. They're not going to. Honestly speaking, if these guys pull out an elaborate hit piece, if they actually, I mean, think about. Let's be critical. Everybody's waiting for. Oh, the JFK docs are going to be released. I mean, let's ask a real critical question here. If the quote-unquote deep state, the cabal, the evil sons of bitches, if these guys killed JFK, which I believe they wholeheartedly did, because I don't believe in Lee Harvey Oswald, the magic bullet. I don't believe in those theories. They definitely killed Kennedy. If they ran an operation that is so heinous, they're going to keep paper like a paper trail? No, they're not. You're not going to keep a paper trail of that stuff. Clandestine operations, they're not going to keep a paper trail lying out there for the Washington archives of all places. Come on, let's be critical here, right, Paul?
Yeah, I tend to agree. I mean, you're not going to leave a smoking gun written in a paper document that's lying in some office already for what are we looking at, 54 years? No, I mean, no. I mean, it's very unlikely. And then, of course, a lot of any witnesses and people around at the time have probably either extremely old now or no longer with us. So there's that element of the equation as well. But I think there's a lot of people being suckered into this belief that this will be the turning point when, you know, the swamp or the cesspit, as I refer to it, would be taken down. And it was never going to happen. And for me, that's why it was just a non-issue. And I didn't see any point in discussing it. I mean, I would have been extremely pleasantly surprised if we had seen it. But it is possible, as we say, within those documents, there are some meaty bits of information that is not going to say, by the way, it wasn't Lee Harvey Oswald, it was whoever it was who did it. I think the issue is there may be something, and that's why there may be genuine concerns that the American people were told something to the contrary. It may have quite a devastating effect because, you know, whatever people's political persuasion is, Kennedy had a big influence on a lot of people. And I know people living in the US who were my sort of parents' age at the time, who said, you know, the effect it had on the American people was profound and it was long lasting. So that kind of generation and possibly a slightly younger generation, that and even the younger people are going to go, hang on, this really happened to our American president. But in terms of actually someone saying, no, it wasn't Lee Harvey Oswald and this is written in a document, it wouldn't be the case. I mean, you talk about the risk of national security. They're not going to put something damning evidence in that regard. And of course, maybe anybody who could have cast some light on it isn't going to be able to. And that's why they put these kind of D notices on things for 50 or 100 years, because they want to make sure anyone who was around at the time, part of the investigation or whatever, is no longer around to be interviewed for that very reason, because then it buries the story effectively and the reality of what certainly did go on. I mean, I've heard comments like, for Lee Harvey Oswald to have done it, he must have been hanging upside down when he you know, from the book depository when he shot him. Well, I mean, that's probably exactly true. So it proves it's absolute nonsense. And the fact he was subsequently killed just absolutely proves that he was innocent, because, of course, unsurprisingly, Lee Harvey Oswald maintained his innocence in the brief period of time after he was arrested, and subsequently he was shot too.
Yeah, exactly correct. You know, CJ, what's your take, brother?
Yeah, just a few thoughts. You know, I started looking through the documents last, and regardless, it wasn't going to change my mind of the events of that day. But you can, you know, go look at the documents. A lot of them, you know, are blocked out because they're from CIA docs that they're regarded as you know, they're not in there. I think one of the important things to talk about is the fact that when Trump is having this conversation regarding the documents, and a lot of us are wanting the truth, I think it's important to talk about some of the symbolisms that are there of the stage of history that we are in. And the only reason I'm not a historian, the reason I know this knowledge is because I went to the Texas Book Depository last year. And if you have never been, I would strongly recommend to put it on anyone's bucket list. And I'm not kidding you. From the moment that I was there looking at the X on the ground close to the grassy knoll that's no longer there where it occurred, to going through the depository, listening to the audio, I had to pause for a moment. I literally kind of broke down to think of an American president that was taken out. And the reason why I talk about the symbolisms, let's talk about the fact that JFK, with the Cuban Missile Crisis, how that reflects upon North Korea, on how close that we were to a nuclear event that I'm sure the deep state was really pushing JFK into, similar to North Korea. Let's talk about the fact that the missile crisis, that JFK specifically worked with Russia to create nuke treaties to kind of de-escalate the nuclear events that were occurring. Think of how that reflects today upon the media, the DNC really trying to push the narrative, not allowing Trump to work with the Russians or the Chinese. There's so many reflections upon history that are relevant today. Let's talk about Trump, or talk about JFK and his, everyone's, you know, remember his speech talking about the media and transparency and honest about secret societies. Let benchmark that against Trump's speech today about the media and how honest they are and the events. I think with Trump talking about the JFK documents and the release of everything, it is kind of a message to those deep state cabal operatives that trying to awake more society regarding those events that occurred. And I'm thankful, V, I'm very thankful that in today's age of technology, that there are smartphones, basically mini computers in everyone's hands that are constantly recording. There's cameras everywhere. It really makes these things difficult. And I think that the Las Vegas incident is a clear sign of that, right? With all they couldn't cover up the information because there was just so much that was coming out. Now, one interesting post that did came out, and I cannot confirm this. Like I said, I haven't went into the documents yet. I wish the image was a little bit bigger. But Joe Biggs did release a tweet, and specifically one of the items that was found in these documents is a Surgeon General's report, where they specifically list in here, and I'll read it, quote unquote. And again, I cannot easily fabricated, you know, just for hype and everything else, but it specifically states that on the assassination stated, the first bullet entered the president's throat below the Adam's apple, clearly showing that two persons were involved with this first shot being fired from the bridge across the parkway in front of the car. To further substantiate this, Potito said, must be with the Surgeon General's office, there was a bullet hole in the windshield in front of the president's car. So there are people out there actually going through these documents, and again, it'll just only add to the conspiracy. But regardless of all this, regardless of the reports and everything coming out, I think the symbolism of the time we are currently in history is so important, and the fact that it's not going to change really anyone's mind that the whole one lone gunman conspiracy is not the truth.
Right.
Yep.
Exactly.
No, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, it is very symbolic of, I mean, whatever people's perception on Trump is, and he's rather like what we say in the UK, Marmite. People either love him or loathe him, and there's no kind of in between. And I am, critical of some of his policies, some of his comments, particularly in terms of foreign policy. But the point is, there is definitely still ongoing an attempt to drain the swamp and the cesspit, and we're seeing that starting to galvanize in a whole bunch of ways to do with the DNC and the whole Russia uranium one story, etc. So, and yet there are similarities. Now, I'm not comparing Trump to Kennedy in any way, shape, or form, but there are, as you rightly point out, these similarities in history. But this really is no surprise that history is just keeps repeating itself, and the whole point of how the world will change is when the world turns around and says, we've had enough of this. And we're seeing this, obviously, Russia, China, etc. But the US and the UK has to say, we're not having history repeating itself anymore. And that will be when the big paradigm shift really happens. Because all we've done for decades is constantly repeat history. And, if somebody, whether it's Kennedy, whether it, I mean, other American presidents have been obviously assassinated too for exactly the same reasons, albeit slightly differently. And the same with people like Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein. It always goes on. History, just because that's all the cabal can do is repeat history. But they come into the end where that history is going to end. And that's when this big shift will happen in a myriad of ways that people yet don't really understand. And certainly the average person who knows nothing is really, their head's going to get scrambled by the turn of events and how things are happening. But yeah, it is important that history also is recognized, and you eloquently put that, CJ. So that's good you did say that.
Yep, absolutely. Gentlemen, we're talking about paradigm shifts, and there's a lot of news coming out, and Paul, what you do, what Jim Willie does, what I do, we really try to educate the world on the One Belt One Road initiative, especially my colleague Harley Schlanger, our colleagues also at the Schiller Institute, the LaRouche PAC. Yeah, we do a lot, as much as we possibly can, to educate the Americans and the Western world on this important paradigm change. I mean, the most important project of the century, Paul. You and I know the gravity of this. You've written phenomenal articles on the One Belt One Road initiative. We go to great lengths to show the importance of the greatest economic change of a century, the greatest human project, the greatest undertaking, probably one of the top 5 in the entire human history, is being taking place right now. Let's bring our listeners really quick up to speed with the latest developments, or just paint them a picture as to exactly how big the one Belt One Road initiative looks like, or how what is the look and feel of it, so to speak. So I guess, Paul, we can start with you, and then CJ, you can chime in, and I'll add my 2 cents as well. Go ahead, man.
Okay, I mean, we'll try and be fairly brief because we could talk for weeks about this. I mean, obviously the plan was to reconstruct the entire world. Effectively, the initial plan was from Vladivostok in the east to Lisbon, Portugal, in the west. And obviously, this isn't to exclude the Americas either, but obviously north and south of that, so to encompass Africa, and obviously eventually to spread to the Americas, which is why we're seeing work beginning in Panama, which is obviously smack in the middle of Central America. We've seen work in obviously as part of the BRICS with Brazil. Admittedly, that's kind of stalled several times, but there's a big plan to basically envelop the entire world in this multipolar world. And people are still saying to me, well, it's just China. China's getting everything out of this. No one else is getting any benefits. Well, tell you what, go to places where the One Belt One Road is actually working. And these nations are becoming prosperous. They're actually starting to stimulate their economy. Yes, there's still problems in its implementation, and there's a lot of complaints in nations that they're still not being paid a fair wage properly, and there are teething problems. But the whole basis is is to regenerate the entire world in a multipolar way where nations work in cooperation for mutually beneficial gain. So nations that have assets can develop them, they can sell them to the world. I mean, yes, they sell a lot of them to China because China is then using that in its own economy to build things, and it's also using those assets, say in Africa, for projects that they're working on in the Middle East and the Far East. But essentially, it has two major components. It's landlocked and obviously the maritime routes. And obviously, principally, the first thing you have to do is put in the infrastructure. So you need all the rail links, the infrastructure, the bridges, the roads, etc., which will then allow you to build new cities, hence the ghost cities that aren't ghost cities. And we've said this before in China. And they're building these ghost cities which aren't elsewhere in the world in the process. And then what you do is along those links, you can then put the rail links in, and it starts to connect the world, and it's looking to exploit nations' potential to grow. So it's not just in terms of the resource. The other thing is the world needs to be re-educated, and people go, oh well, that just applies to Africa. No, it doesn't. It applies to the entire Western world as well. We need to have a re-education in everything and the illusion of the world we live in. So it's multifaceted. It's healthcare. It's trade and commerce. It's education, and it's really to rebuild the world in a way that is fit for purpose for the 21st, 22nd, and onward centuries. And it is probably, from my perspective, we don't know everything that's ever happened in history, but for me, it's probably the most important project that has ever happened, and history will show it was the project that destroyed the cabal and rebuilt the world without them. And
Yes.
and it's that important, and that's why it's crucial for nations in Europe as well. And they are obviously certain nations more than others. The UK is kind of slowly being dragged along in this regard. The Americas is a lot slow, particularly North America. But the idea is the whole world embraces it, and the US could have many, many win-win situations in terms of trade and commerce with every nation on the planet, instead of trying to decide that it's going to impose tariffs. I mean, on every nation, and the nation turns away and says, look, we don't want to work and trade with you. So yeah, it's a huge project, and there's lots of, I've put articles out on the website, as countless other people have done, but it's very hard to encompass it, but in a very short sort of conversation. But essentially it's to build out. So in Africa, where you build railways, you're then able to utilize the resources that they have and build economies, build towns. And effectively, once an area becomes prosperous, you can build a town out of it. People can live, they can have a good quality of life, live in nice houses, apartment. You have, water, sanitization. And then you build out, and that effectively builds a community, because that has to be self-sustaining. So then you need hospitals, you need schools. And that's how this process works. It's just this building out gradually across the world. Now, obviously in the Western world, we already have these hospitals, housing estate, and infrastructure in place, but it's also starting to fall into disrepair. I mean, the UK is the same. It needs huge infrastructure upgrade and rebuild. So it's not as though it just solely focuses on the underdeveloped world. And by building this process out, and also it breaks barriers down, because countries will start working with other countries because they'll realize there's mutually beneficial gain. And within nations, it's breaking down these barriers between groups who've been ethnically divided or religiously divided, and they're now coming together going, we don't need this anymore. Why the hell were we doing this?
Exactly.
We can just work together. And
exactly.
and that
Nothing
probably
like
in a very broad sense.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
Nothing like economics to bring people together. Put all their BS aside, and put all their infighting and their petty arguments aside, and come together for the greater good. I mean, economics is a powerful driving force. It's the most powerful driving force in human development.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We had the Chinese Party conference recently, and how they've kind of elevated Xi Jinping, and people are going, well, he's just turning into this dictator. No, he's not. The whole point. I heard you. We've talked about this, and I caught it the other day when you said, 700 million Chinese people have been taken out of poverty into middle class, and people mistake the fact it's a one-party state and think it's a huge dictatorship. Well, my advice is go to China, go and see what I've been there. Go and see what it's actually like, not what you're told it's like. It is nothing how you'd ever anticipate it to be. Yes, it has its problems, but it's sorting those problems out. I mean, they've dealt with 1 million corrupt officials under the anti-graft policy. So, and they know they've still got problems, and Xi Jinping's gone, well, we've done some great things, but we're going to do a whole bunch more greater things. And I think arguably in history, in 30, 40, 50 years, people will look back and talk about Xi Jinping and go, he probably was, undoubtedly the greatest Chinese leader they've ever had. And arguably an even greater leader than a lot of people perceive Putin. And I'm not diminishing Putin's achievements either. But what he has done in terms of China and how they've built their economy and how they're rotating their economy and how they're exporting what they believe is the multipolar world to the rest of the world via the One Belt, One Road is an astonishing achievement. And they've done this knowing full well that they had to take these very tiny steps in the process, because the risk is you had the Western kind of military industrial complex, the whole Wall Street, London, the City of London financial complex, and all these dominant forces that they were always having to make these tiny steps to get to the point where now they have the strength to say, we can resist whatever you throw at us. But for a good decade or so, that was very much not the case. And that's why people were going, well, China could just do this. And the Russians said to the Chinese in 2008, well, we can just sink the dollar. And it was like, well, no, we can't. Because we sink it, and then what? You're a weak nation economically, militarily, relatively on a world stage. We're relatively a lot weaker economically than we are now, 10 years later. And they have a very pragmatic viewpoint. The Chinese work in 5-year cycles, but they actually have a 100-year plan. You can guarantee in a very broad sense, China knows what it's doing in 20, 30, 50, 100 years. And the thing is, they stick to it and they'll work through it and they'll make it work and they make it happen. And that is just, I mean, for anyone in the West, that is an astonishing achievement. And in essence, that's why for me, it will probably go down, the new One Belt, One Road will probably go down as the most significant development in the history of humanity, be it in the past and even in the future, no matter what technological develops we make. It's not that really gives the One Belt, One Road the gravitas. It's the fact that they took the entire world that was torn apart by the cabal and they're putting it back together and achieving the kind of things that if I'd looked back 20 years ago, I would have had aspirations to see this happen. Never actually believed at that point it was possible. But we're actually seeing the impossible now being realized across the world. And what else can you say about it? I think for me, that's about as much as I can say.
Yeah, absolutely.
Without talking for weeks about it, of course.
The best part that I love, and most people don't understand how China's going about doing this with every single investment they're doing in foreign countries. The greatest point here that people don't seem to understand is China's doing something so revolutionary that the Western powers have never in their history has ever done. And that is when they make an investment into an investee country. Okay. They never ask those countries to pay that loan back. Okay. They never ask them. 80% of that money is spent on a perpetual bond. That means only the interest needs to be paid. The principal is never returned. So that's the beauty of this whole entire thing. It's a win-win situation. China's smart. How are they paving the One Belt, One Road? They're paying it in U.S. bonds.
Well, yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, largely, they're just dumping US dollars to pay for
That's
things.
Way to de-dollarize. Put it to good use. While it's still worth something,
Yeah, absolutely. And
And speaking of China, people need to understand this. We want to talk about a great egalitarian society. I mean, there are more women. A quick side note: there are more women billionaires in China than any other place in the world. 6 out of 10 female billionaires in the world are in China. 6 out of 10. In other words, 60% of the world's female billionaires live and are Chinese. Moving on. Speaking of,
it's not bad for a totalitarian regime.
I know it's not bad for a bunch of communists, huh?
And the other thing is they haven't done it like a lot of Western billionaires, because the one thing in China is if you commit heinous crimes to do with fraud, you will get the death penalty. People don't realize this. They have a very harsh regime that people who commit acts of gargantuan fraud and deception, they often, if they're
What?
found
Really?
guilty. Yeah,
Really,
yeah, it
Paul?
happens.
You mean to tell me they're not given a bonus
Well,
and
yeah.
a bonus at the end of the year and given a golden parachute so they can leave the companies with all the fraud that they ran into the ground? And you mean the taxpayers are not bailing out the Chinese banks? Really? Wow!
It's shocking, isn't it?
What a novel concept! Putting a banker behind jail. What a concept!
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine having 1 million people working in government proportionately who are actually dealt with under anti-graft laws, and they receive very stiff penalties? I mean, but that's how China operates. I mean, people might not like their perception of it, but we're in the West. I mean, yeah, as you rightly point out, if people here who work in financial institutions break laws, they end up like getting, in the UK, they probably end up getting knighted, or they join the House of Lords, or they get some big fat payoff. And whereas obviously in China you do that, and exactly the opposite happens. But as I say, the question always comes about is people think China is this totalitarian communist state where everyone's suppressed and no one's allowed to have freedom of expression. Well, go to China, walk around and look at the people, and you'll see, yeah, there are people who are still very poor, and that's part of the aim. They're going to eventually, China wants to take every single person out of poverty. And I tell you what, don't bet against it, because probably eventually they will, and probably a lot sooner than you think. But you walk around in cities and you look at the Chinese people, they don't look miserable. They actually look happy. They're contented, most of them in their lives, because they realize
the latest polls done in China shows close to 70% of Chinese are absolutely happy with their lives. These are real polls. These are not like, people say, well, those are communist polls. If they say they're not happy, then they'll probably get executed or sent to a labor camp. No, that doesn't happen there. Okay, I mean, the government, the Politburo in China itself, they are fearful of their people. They want to make sure that people are happy. Believe it or not, they know that if they have an unhappy population, they will be rife for revolution, number one. And number two, that revolution will most likely be fomented by some sort of a Western intelligence operation, masquerading itself as a non-governmental organization. I mean, we've seen this happen time and time again, Paul.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that is a big point. I mean, I covered this off in a podcast to do with recently, last couple of weeks, to do with China and the developments. And at one point, and I'll quite happily mention it because you've mentioned it, the Chinese are terrified of upsetting their people, and their people railing against them. That's why they've done everything to keep their people happy, and they're always constantly asking their people, how can we improve things? What can we do to make it better? Because the point is, when you have a country of that size and 1.3 or whatever billion people it is, they realize that is a formidable nation of people to get on the wrong side of. And it's true. Absolutely. So they constantly have to reinvent themselves. And it's why I said, people talk about the economics of China. No, China is having to constantly reinvent their own political system and how it deals with the challenges that they face in terms of the Chinese people, and always keeping them on side. And we know in the Western world, my government, I mean, just doesn't give a damn about anybody. They're not interested. And they know they don't need to give a damn, because the people will just keep going, well, I'll just vote the other party in, because they're so radically different. Of course, the second they're elected, nothing changes. And for decades, they just don't see this. You would never pull the wool over the Chinese people's eyes in that regard. They go, hang on a minute. Nothing's changed in the last 20 years. Well, they wouldn't tolerate it, but in the West, we tolerate this. And yet we're the democracy and they're the totalitarian regime. It's incredible.
Yep, exactly. Exactly. And people are like, well, they're controlling the internet out there. Yeah, they're controlling the internet because who controls the freaking internet right now? It's U.S. and it's proxy allies that are controlling the internet. So,
yeah, but you say that, but when I was there, I could use Skype, I could use the internet. I could use my phone. I didn't have any restrictions, so I didn't
No,
seem
you
to. I
don't
mean,
feel like you're missing anything.
I mean,
You just
maybe
don't
they
have
just,
the.
yeah. Sorry, go on.
What they're really blocking there, Paul, is the U.S. software that has all the back doors, and it's the U.S.
Yes.
websites that have all the back doors, like your fake book, a lot of your Google crap that has back doors to U.S. Intelligence companies and whatnot. Those are the things they block. I
Yes,
mean,
absolutely.
The Russians block the same thing because it's dangerous to have the tentacles of the cabal anywhere in your country. You don't want them there. They do nothing. You're talking about a cabal that has a track record of fomenting sectarian violence and sectarian chaos. And that's the last thing you need in your country. If I was a country, I'd make sure Facebook, some of the Google services that are out there are totally blocked. Absolutely. 1000%. And speaking of China, again, while we're on the subject, gentlemen, and CJ, I'll start off with you. This is, I guess it's a good thing to see this, but Jared of Arabia will be taking a back seat in regards to this whole entire Trump China trip. CJ, what say you?
Well, yeah, everyone knows the amount of investment dollars, right, that they have with the Kushner real estate and the development, the complete conflict
Oh
of
yeah.
interest for him to be involved with any discussion. Now, there's a lot of speculation regarding Jared and Ivanka that perhaps they may be going back to New York, that they are carefully plotting their exit strategy, which is a good thing. I don't think, we've discussed this several times, but I don't think it's a good idea at any point to bring family members into that. It's a difficult thing to do. I really don't encourage it a whole lot with business. But to bring it into that political landscape is just so difficult. But yeah, Jared needs to go back to his debt-ridden New York with the amount of debt that he's facing and how he's going to have to come up with the funds outside of his political alliances.
Yep, exactly. London Paul, what say you?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it doesn't surprise me. I can imagine that when Xi Jinping went over to the US and obviously stayed with Trump in Florida, there's no doubt that Kushner would have met him and he would have just gone, I'm sorry, who's this guy? And I'm gonna and it's pretty obvious that, yeah, and I agree with CJ, there's definitely Kushner and Ivanka Trump are in the process of extricating themselves from being part of the Washington establishment. And the truth is, look, whatever people's strengths or lack of strengths are, it's a world of difference between being in business, whether you're successful, average, or worse than useless, and then going to try and work in the world of politics. It just doesn't marry up. And if you take your business ideas, as Trump's discovered, into politics, it just doesn't work. You can't do it. And undoubtedly, it makes absolute eminent sense that Kushner does take a backseat. My biggest concern still is whatever meddling he's doing in the Middle East and how that's influencing US policy. I mean, we've without going into too much detail, we've seen apparently the UN now is confident that Assad was responsible for the chemical attack in April. Now, the point is, confident with no actual evidence, and no UN inspectors were actually there to take any evidence at the time. Now, the question is, what's kind of fomenting this attitude? Well, it's pretty obvious that somewhere in the process, Kushner's involved in this because he always seems to be meddling in what's going on in the Middle East. So
he's Netanyahu's whipping boy, man. That's what it is. He's Netanyahu's little pool boy. So Netanyahu's pool boy is going to go ahead and take this whole entire Zionist pro-Israel stance, which it's not a good thing. It's not good for Israel, and it's not good for the United States. That's the problem here, man. It's ridiculous. But stupid is as stupid does, and the cabal is as stupid as they come, Paul.
Well, yeah, it is. You're absolutely right. What Netanyahu's doing is highly detrimental to the Israeli people in the short, medium, and long term.
We have this live. Just breaking. Crowds are cheering right now. Catalan Parliament declares independence from Spain. Boom.
Well, I said actually recently in the podcast, ignore the rhetoric. the process will go on. I mean, it was obvious. There was all this talk that, the Catalan would back off and they'd say, we'll have new election. And they called the bluff of Madrid, but you knew full well they go, no, we're going to have independence. And what's that going to do? What's Madrid going to start doing? I mean, are they going to forcibly remove people from parliament? Are they going to start sending troops into Catalonia and start trying to impose their will on the people? It's come to the point now where even Catalonia, which is economically very strong, but in a region is pretty small in terms of the population relatively, not insignificant, is now standing up to the nation and going, do you know what? We've had enough. We wanted our independence for decades, and you know what? We're really going to go for it. What are you going to do? It's a bit like what you do with the cabal. Just call their bluff. And when you call their bluff, they walk away with their tail between their legs and they won't actually engage. It's always been the weapon of fear and intimidation. That's how they've succeeded.
That's all it is.
And now, despite the threat of arrest, despite the intimidation by the police when they had the referendum vote, in Catalan, they're going, no, we've had enough. We want our independence, and we are going to force this point. Now, it's interesting, what does Madrid do next? And we have to wait and see. But whatever they do, the rest of Spain's going to go, hang on. Whether we agree that Catalan should cede and form an independent nation is not the point. What are they doing to our fellow Spanish people? It's going to have a huge resonating effect. And it's the beginning of a long process where we'll see this across the entire face of Europe. And we'll see a complete difference in terms of the structure and makeup of nations. How, and I've said this before, how the old kind of pre-World War I, if you want to go and look at how Europe's not exactly going to be reshaped, but look at the map of Europe pre-World War One, because that was one of the big points. World War One was nothing to do. It was not a war to fight. It was to destroy empires, to destroy the Habsburg Empire and reshape the world in terms of Europe. That was all it was about. Hence why everyone goes, well, and there was no point. What the hell was that war about? That's what it was about. And hence removing the Tsars, as we've said previously. So it doesn't surprise me. And it's indicative of this big change that's coming about in Europe. And they'll brand it populism. They'll brand it everything to try and detract from the fact that you are seeing people waking up. Like the Syrian attack, I read the tweet feed on several news sites in the West, and the vast majority of people going, "This is fake news. This is rubbish. I'm sorry, I don't buy this. Why would Assad do it? He's winning." And you're seeing people beginning to wake up to the reality, and that's why we're seeing things like events in Catalonia happen. It's that process that people are saying, "We've had enough." And you know what? You've literally backed us into a corner. And the saying always goes, when people have got nothing to lose, they will start to do more, undertake these kind of actions because they feel we've got nothing to lose. So let's try. What's the worst they're going to do? And we'll see what the worst Madrid's going to do. But the eyes of the world will be upon them. And already people are rightly saying, hang on, you call yourself a democracy. And this is what you do to the people who decide they don't want to be part of the nation anymore. Meanwhile, in other parts of the world, when it strategically and geopolitically suits the cabal, they'll move hand over fist to break nations apart and cede. But Crimea, it's like, it's a capital offense. It's a war crime. Crimea had the audacity to leave Ukraine and join Russia, despite the fact the people wanted it. And this is another thing, because the cabal knows it's the thin end of the wedge when Catalan really cedes from Spain, becomes an independent nation. What's going to happen around the rest of Europe? It's not going to be the end of this. It's just merely the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. With that, folks and guys, I think we've come to the end of the broadcast. London Paul, give out your shout outs and how people could follow you. And CJ, you can do it right after that, man.
Okay, well, thanks very much. Yeah, well, obviously we have the website, thesiriusreport.com. That's SIRIUS. And obviously, yeah, we have the Facebook group. We have the website, as we said. We've got the Twitter page, The Serious Report. And obviously we have, the premium content page, which you'd like people to subscribe. It's only $4.75 a month. And we do churn out things 5 days a week. And we feel it's very on the ball, cogent comment and analysis and intelligence and observation about everything that's going on. And we encourage everyone to subscribe and many thanks to everyone who has, and obviously to Rogue Money for all their support and helping us this year, which we greatly appreciate.
It's our pleasure, Paul. CJ, what's going on for the rest of the day? Any news? Any last minute comments?
Yeah, make sure to check back 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We will be going live with Michael Snyder. Michael is the owner of the Economic Collapse blog, and he's also a candidate for Congress this year out of District 1 in Idaho. So that was
Nice.
actually recommended. And then over the weekend, we will be releasing another Rogue 420 interview with Dr. Michelle Ross, who's with the
Nice.
cannabis health coach, and she does a lot in that particular industry. So yeah, so a big day and a big weekend ahead for Rogue.
Absolutely looking forward to it. It's exciting. Keep it strapped here, folks. Smash the subscribe button, share it with friends and family, and hit that notification bell. With that being said, we're over and out. Take it away, CJ.